Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining our presentation this evening. My name is Richard Barfield. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at Ergomed PLC. My most recent role before Ergomed was as the Chief Financial Officer at Chiltern International, where I was part of a management team that grew the enterprise value of that business by 6 times over 4 years from 2013 until it sailed to Covance in 2017 for $1.2 billion. I'm delighted to be at Ergomed, where I believe there is also a great opportunity for substantial growth. Ergomed's vision has remained clear and consistent in the past 2 years, and that is to maintain and expand our global leadership in orphan drug development and pharmacovigilance. We are the leading global independent company with deep expertise in these specialist fields. To say a little bit more about the business and give you an insight into the different parts of the company, we have a full-service clinical research outsourcing capability. So this is providing complete global phase 1 to 4 clinical development and trial management to large pharma, specialty pharma, and biotech clients. In terms of therapeutic area expertise, we're very much focused on rare disease, orphan drugs, and oncology. We also have a pharmacovigilance and drug safety division, a global leader in pharmacovigilance and specialized multilingual medical information. This slide gives an overview of our global platform and our geographic reach. And I would point to 2 major themes on this slide. The first one is about growth. You'll see that Ergomed has a consistent track record over the past 6 years since the IPO in 2014 of a 22% plus revenue CAGR. That was repeated and extended in 2019 with a 26.1% revenue increase. And in the first half of 2020, which I'll say a lot more about later in the presentation, our revenue in the USA grew by 79%. The second theme that I would like to pull out on this slide is geographic reach. You can see that we cover North America, Europe, Middle East, North Africa, as well as Asia Pacific. So we have a global reach with 16 offices worldwide. We employ 1,000 people globally. We support our clients' drug products through our pharmacovigilance division in over 100 countries worldwide. And we're currently conducting clinical trials in more than 60 countries globally. We are focused as a business in high growth markets. You can see on the left-hand side of the chart here that the CRO market globally, these numbers are from a couple of years ago, so it's now about $30 billion. And the predicted growth rate of that market through 2022 is 6% per annum. The markets that we specialize in are on the right-hand side of the slide. So our focus on biotech and specialty pharma is in a market where outsourcing is growing, will increase from 66% to 77% over the next few years. I mentioned oncology earlier. That's growing at a rate of 9% per annum. And the orphan drug research area is growing at 11% per annum. In pharmacovigilance, global growth is even higher at 16% per annum. And I will also just mention that the USA is an extremely important market for us. I mentioned our 79% growth rate over the first half of 2020. The USA is the largest clinical research drug development market in the world, and over 50% of clinical trials require a US presence. Just a week ago, we announced our interim results, for the first half of 2020. And here are some headlines. I'll go into this in more detail later in the presentation. Our service fee revenue grew by 26%. In North America, as I've already mentioned, we grew by 79%, and our adjusted EBITDA grew by 40%. We started the year with 850 employees. By June, we had 970, and we now have over 1,000. So the company has passed 1,000 employees for the first time. That means there's been a growth of about 18% since the beginning of the year. I can say that during the second quarter and throughout the coronavirus pandemic, we have continued to recruit, to train, and to develop our team, and we have not had to make any layoffs or any furloughs. So it's been a good first half of the year, about which I will say more later in the presentation. So why has the company been so resilient in its positioning and its response relative to the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, this is because our services in pharmacovigilance and CRO are provided under long-term contracts. Typically, these contracts are for 2 to 3 years. And on the CRO side, they are for essential medical research in the areas of oncology and rare disease. On the pharmacovigilance side, we are responding to mandatory regulatory requirements that all companies must comply with for their pharmaceutical products. So whether you're talking about a paracetamol, which has been around for 40 years, or the latest biologic, the pharmacovigilance regime has to be in place, and in spite of the pandemic, it's still there and it has to be maintained. And that's why our numbers have stood up so well. We have also, over the second quarter, completely transitioned to remote working. So we now have close to 1,000 people. That transition was very smooth. In both our pharmacovigilance and CRO divisions, the technology enabled us to complete that transition. And we have found that our efficiency, our productivity has been maintained at a consistent level in spite of the transition to home working. We have managed very well, as you'll see in the numbers shortly, our cost base and our cash. We have a strong balance sheet. So we have an unutilized £30 million credit facility. We have over £14 million cash in the bank, and we're generating cash at the rate of £1 to £1.5 million on a monthly basis. We have also contributed to research in the COVID-19 areas and established ourselves as a strong partner for pharmaceutical companies conducting COVID-19 research. So what is pharmacovigilance? This is the science and all the activities relating to the detection, the assessment, the understanding and the prevention of adverse effects and other drug-related problems. And if there's one thing to take away from this slide, it is resilience and it is stickiness. And you can see on the chart on the right-hand side that what tends to happen in this business is clients who give us their products to look after and to monitor and to report tend to come back year after year. They renew their contracts with us and they give us additional products to support and additional geographies to cover. And hence the track record of very consistent revenue growth in this business. In the first half of 2020, overall, the revenues in pharmacovigilance were up 62%. If you extract the recent acquisition of Vigilance USA, that is still a growth rate of 36%. And speaking of Vigilance USA, this is the acquisition that we made in the first half of 2020. So on the 10th of January, we completed this transaction. We paid $10 million, and I think it's worth just spending a moment considering what we got for our $10 million. The first thing is a contracted order book of future revenues. So this is predictable, visible revenues of $9.8 million. So we basically paid dollar for dollar for a future revenue and cash flow stream. There were 40 new clients, taking our total number of clients in this division from 120 to 160. We bought 900,000 of EBITDA, so we paid roughly 11 times. The management team that joined us is very strong. They have been extended and given additional responsibilities on a broader remit throughout the group. There were 70 terrific highly qualified, experienced colleagues who joined our business. And if you look at these two boxes at the bottom, this is really fundamental to what this transaction was all about. 5.6 million of new contracted business, which we would not otherwise have won without this business. And we've grown our pipeline of potential new awards since January by over £11 million with this acquisition. So that has worked out extremely well for us, and isn't it a great example of how to acquire and quickly integrate and drive value out of an acquisition. What is CRO? What is clinical research outsourcing? Well, this is where we provide a service of conducting clinical trials on behalf of drug sponsors, be they large pharma, specialty pharma, or biotech. We cover the full range of phases from phase 1 to 4. And again, this is a business which, since the IPO of the business in 2014, has had a very steady and consistent track record of annual growth at an 18% CAGR over that period. We have over 60 clients, over 300 employees. We're conducting 70 studies in more than 60 countries around the world in this division. Now let me say a few words about our income statement for the first half of 2020. Our financial performance over the first half of 2020 was strong. Our total revenue increased by 14.8% compared to the first half of 2019, but our service fee revenue, so this is excluding pass-through revenues where we're effectively providing an administrative service for our clients, the service fee revenue, which is for the services that we actually provide and bill for, was up almost 26%. Our gross profit was up 4 million, and there was further gross margin expansion of 4.6 percentage points from 41.2% to 45.8%. Our adjusted EBITDA went up 40% from 6.5 million to 9.1 million. As I mentioned earlier, our cash closed at 14.1 million. It started the year just over 14 million and finished in basically the same position. In the meantime, we paid 8.1 million acquisition cost and fees for the Vigilance USA business, which I described earlier. So a very strong operating cash flow of 9.2 million, basically mirroring and reflecting the EBITDA performance over that period. The order book I will say a little bit more about in a moment, but that order book, which is these are not orders which may or may not convert into contracts. This is actually contracted, committed future revenue and future cash flow, and that was up 28% compared to the first half of 2019, or 22% since the beginning of 2020. And finally, our basic adjusted earnings per share went up from 9.6p to 11.3p. That's an increase of 17.7%. So overall, a strong, robust financial performance, particularly considering the challenges of the pandemic during the second quarter. I'll finish by saying a word about our outlook and our expected news flow. Well, the first piece of news flow, and this was mentioned in our recent interim report, and there will be a circular issued to shareholders in the next few days. We are asking our shareholders to approve the transfer to our retained earnings reserve of the balance on our share premium account and our merger reserve, basically restoring our retained earnings reserve to a position that we actually have distributable reserves. So that is the next and most immediate piece of news flow which will come out in the next few days. In terms of how we are positioned, so what is the outlook for the second half of 2020? Well, the key to that is on the two charts at the bottom of the page. Firstly, our new awards growth. Over the first half of 2020, we achieved our sales targets. So our business development team met and indeed exceeded their sales targets, up 23% compared to the first half of 2019. And what that translates into is an order book So typically in the CRO business, these contracts are 2 to 3 years long. In the pharmacovigilance business, they are also 2 to 3 years long. They have a very high, as much as 95% incidence of rolling forward into extended contracts on the pharmacovigilance side. And that order book of committed future revenue and cash flow grew by 28% compared to last year, as I mentioned earlier, up 22% since the beginning of the year. Finally, to summarize, at Ergomed, we have a strong continued growth trend in revenues and profits. Our margins have been maintained during these challenging times. We have a global leadership position in pharmacovigilance, in oncology and rare disease and orphan drugs. We are operating in a market where the market drivers are favorable, and we are well positioned at demonstrating resilience relative to COVID-19. We have rapidly and successfully integrated our most recent acquisition of Vigilance USA. We are accelerating our growth in the key North American market. We have the management strength in depth for our future organic growth and our M&A growth. And I will finish by, if I may, quoting from our interim results announcement, which, as I mentioned earlier, we published last Tuesday. In the first half of 2020, Ergomed developed exceptional progress, both operationally and financially. We go into the second half firmly positioned to continue our strong momentum. So I will finish there and be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed for the presentation. It does look like it's been quite a year so far, hasn't it? Most of the questions that we've had have been around acquisition. So I'll try and go through in a structure or some sort of order. To start with, the Vigilance acquisition, was that paid for out of cash?
It was paid entirely out of cash, yes, out of our own cash flow.
Okay. And are you intending to carry on spending cash generated by the business on acquisitions? Second part of the same question, will there become a time, or there will come a point in time where the number of attractive acquisitions dries up? Is that the case?
Yes. Well, let me take the two parts of those questions in order. Regarding spending cash on acquisitions, well, that will clearly depend on the size of the acquisition. I will say that we have, as I mentioned earlier, we finished the first half with £14.1 million in the bank. We were generating operating cash flow in the region of £1 to £1.5 million a month, every month over the first half. That trend has continued into the second half. And that obviously puts us in a strong cash position from an organic perspective. At the same time, we have a £30 million facility, which at this point remains unutilized and was put in place specifically to support our organic and inorganic growth ambitions. So from a cash perspective, we certainly have the firepower that we need. We also have strong support from our shareholders, but clearly approaching the shareholders is a different matter, and it would be in the context of a much larger transaction. So the cash is certainly there, and that would be the first port of call. Regarding opportunities, on the pharmacovigilance side, the number of opportunities available for investment is limited. I mentioned earlier that we are the leading standalone pharmacovigilance consultancy, and there aren't many like us in the world. The Vigilance USA opportunity was something of a one-off. Elsewhere, pharmacovigilance services tend to be provided within the broader CRO activities of larger CRO companies. So our focus going forward, clearly North America, as I mentioned earlier, it's an extremely important market and one in which we're growing rapidly. And there are certainly a number of CRO companies where we need to strengthen our position in CRO in North America. And there are a number of opportunities, large and small, for us to look at. We are active. We are looking for that. We've made no secret of it. But in these times, it is difficult to originate, to conduct, and conclude transactions, and so therefore, we are being cautious. At the same time, we will always be disciplined over acquisition opportunities, but there are certainly opportunities there now, and we're looking at them. At the same time, we will continue to invest internally for our own organic growth, both in North America and globally.
Thank you. And with a focus on growing that US business, and we've seen a number of UK listed healthcare, pharma companies adding a NASDAQ or looking to add a NASDAQ listing. Is that something you've looked at? Is there any comment or thought on that?
No, I would say that we haven't looked at it seriously. Obviously, we've talked about it, we've thought about it. But I think in order to do that, you would need a larger presence than we currently have in North America. And at the same time, I think you would need to be a larger business. We have very strong support from our shareholders in the UK, and we have shareholders outside the UK as well. It's probably a little bit early in our evolution for us to be thinking about having a joint listing. But obviously, as we get larger and develop our US presence, that would be on the agenda.
Question that came in early on. You said you now have more than 1,000 employees. Where have those employees gone? Which geographically have been the areas that have gained the greatest, I guess, percentage or by number? And how are you controlling costs?
Right. Well, a significant part of that growth in employee numbers is through the acquisition. I mentioned that we have over 70 colleagues who joined us through the Vigilance USA acquisition. So we've grown by just over 150 since the beginning of the year, and 70 of them are right there in the USA. And that's extremely important because, as I've explained a couple of times, it's an extremely important market. We now have well over 100 people in that market, and we're growing quickly. And it's great to have that really solid base of great people based right there in the Research Triangle Park at the epicenter of the pharmaceutical industry in the USA. The rest of the growth has really been spread around the group. So we have operations throughout Western Europe, in UK, in Germany, in Spain, in the CEE, and there's been a fairly broad spread of people in different parts of the group. We do obviously have to control our costs. We have the usual strong budgetary and approval controls in place. We make sure that we have the work before we add the cost. And we are disciplined, and I think that's very clear from the improvement in the gross and net margin over the first half of 2020.
I'm going to read this one out word for word, so I make sure I get the question just as the questioner intended.
Right.
When you say capital reduction on net retained earnings account, does that mean you take a write-off charge to decrease the total assets/liabilities on your balance sheet?
No, absolutely not. I'm afraid that's a misunderstanding of what a capital reduction is. The retained earnings reserve in the balance sheet of the parent company, Ergomed PLC, the legal entity which is the parent company, that retained earnings reserve has a deficit on it because of accumulated historic losses and impairments. As a company, we have an extremely strong balance sheet. We have £44 million of net assets, including £14 million of cash. But for historic reasons I just explained, we do have this deficit on the retained earnings reserve within one legal entity, which is the parent company. And it is the parent company from which distributions, so that could be dividends or it could be a share buyback, it is the parent company from which those distributions would be made. Therefore, it is somewhat anomalous to have such a strong balance sheet, but to have a parent company with a deficit in its retained earnings reserve. So to restore that retained earnings reserve, we simply transfer those balances on the share premium account and the merger reserve into the retained earnings reserve. That does require shareholder and court approval. It's a very standard established procedure which companies go through, and it's a demonstration that we are now a mature, fully fledged, responsible company with a solid, predictable earning stream and cash flow. And we have to put ourselves in a position as a further element in the good financial management, the good financial housekeeping, if you like, of having distributable reserves. And that's exactly what we're doing. And I'll just emphasize, there is no depletion in our net assets. There is no distribution of cash. There is no reduction in the number of shares in issue. And the financial position of the company is completely unchanged by this, other than now having reserves which are distributable rather than non-distributable.